The afternoon light caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one I'd given her for her birthday in my first life, back when I still believed blood meant loyalty. "Come on, Emma," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's just temporary. You know how hard it is to get an EIN approved quickly, and I have this amazing opportunity. The supplier needs the tax paperwork by Friday, or the deal falls through." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. In my first life, this moment had never happened. Sarah hadn't needed to ask permission for anything. She'd simply taken my clients, my reputation, my freedom, everything. But this wasn't my first life. "What kind of business?" I asked, even though I knew. God, did I know. "Luxury import-export," she said, eyes bright with barely concealed greed. "High-end fashion accessories from Italy. The margins are incredible, Emma. I could make 6 figures in the first year alone." 6 figures in debt was more like it. 6 figures that would eventually become 7, then 8, as she cut corners, dodged taxes, and ran the business into the ground while living like a queen. In my first life, she'd done it all under a network of shell companies and fake names. When the IRS finally caught up to her, she'd burned it all down and walked away clean. After pinning everything on me? "I don't know, Sarah." I let doubt creep into my voice, playing the role she expected. The naive older sister. The eternal pushover. "Please." She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm day. "You're the only one I can trust with this. Mom and Dad would ask too many questions, and you know how they are about business ventures." Trust. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. In my first life, I died in a county jail cell awaiting trial for tax fraud I didn't commit. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence, all of it pointing to businesses I'd never heard of, transactions I'd never made, debts I'd never incurred, but they were all linked to my legitimate business, connected through a web Sarah had spent years weaving. She'd visited me once before the end, sat across from me in that dingy visiting room, tears streaming down her face as she told me how sorry she was, how she wished she could help, but she couldn't afford a lawyer, how Mom and Dad were so disappointed they couldn't even talk about me anymore. I'd believed those tears. Right up until the guard found me on the floor of my cell, my heart giving out from the stress and the shame and the hopelessness of it all. 43 years old and dying in a jail cell for crimes my baby sister committed. The last thing I saw was her face in my mind, crying those crocodile tears. Then I woke up in my apartment 5 years earlier, my phone alarm blaring with a ringtone I hadn't used in half a decade. I'd laid there for 3 hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities. Time travel, coma dream, psychotic break, but my body knew the truth. I was 38 again, 5 years before everything went to hell. 5 years before Sarah's first business opportunity. The universe had given me a gift, a second chance. I wasn't going to waste it. "Okay," I said now, watching Sarah's face light up with triumph. "I'll help you." "Really? Oh my God, Emma, thank you." She squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. "You're the best sister ever. I swear I'll pay you back for this. When my business takes off, I'll—" "Just promise me one thing," I interrupted. "Anything. Promise me you'll be careful, that you'll do everything by the book. No shortcuts." She laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl because I knew that laugh. That was the laugh she'd make later when she thought she was so clever, so untouchable. "Of course," she said. "I'm not stupid. Emma, I know how important it is to stay legitimate." Liar. But I smiled and nodded and pulled out my phone to send her the information she needed. My employer identification number, the key to everything. The drive home was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I replayed the conversation, second-guessing myself. Was I really doing this? Was I really going to let her hang herself with the rope I was providing? Yes, I was. Because I remembered everything, every detail of how she'd destroyed me. It started small in my first life. A client here, a contract there. Sarah had been so charming, so enthusiastic about my success. She'd volunteer to help with networking events, to make introductions, to support my business. And slowly, methodically, she'd poisoned every well. Emma's great, she'd tell potential clients. But between you and me, she's been struggling lately. Personal issues, you know. I'd be happy to help out if you need someone more reliable. I hadn't known, not for years. I'd thought I was just hitting a rough patch, that the market was shifting, that I needed to work harder. So I did. I worked myself to the bone while Sarah smiled and nodded and slowly built her own empire on the foundations of mine. By the time I figured it out, it was too late. She had the clients, the contracts, the reputation, and I had nothing but debt and a failing business I couldn't bear to let die. That's when she'd come to me with her opportunity. A merger, she called it. Combine our resources, share the infrastructure, split the profits. It would save my business and accelerate hers. I'd signed the papers without reading them carefully enough. She'd made sure of that, bringing them by late at night when I was exhausted, flattering me about my business acumen, telling me how much she looked up to me. The papers gave her power of attorney over business decisions, access to my accounts, authority to sign contracts in my name. She'd bled me dry within 6 months, then vanished into her shell company network, leaving me holding the bag for millions in fraudulent transactions. And when the IRS came knocking, every trail led back to me. My lawyer had been sympathetic, but realistic. The evidence is overwhelming, Emma. Every business registration, every tax filing, every fraudulent claim, it's all in your name. Unless you can prove someone else had access and intent. But I couldn't prove anything. Sarah had been too careful. The shell companies were registered in different states, the transactions routed through multiple accounts. On paper, it all looked like I'd built a house of cards and tried to fraud my way to the top. The prosecutor had been less sympathetic. "White-collar criminals like you disgust me," she'd said during one hearing. "Stealing from honest taxpayers, living large while working families struggle. I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life paying for what you've done." I tried to tell them about Sarah. Of course I had. But with no evidence, it just sounded like a desperate woman trying to blame her innocent sister. Sarah had played her part perfectly, the concerned sibling, shocked and heartbroken by her sister's crimes, willing to testify for the prosecution if needed. She never had to testify. I died before it got that far, but now I had knowledge, I had time, and I had a plan. I spent the next 3 days building my defense before the offense even started. Every piece of documentation I could think of, every safeguard, every firewall between my legitimate business and whatever Sarah was about to create. First, I officially registered my own business under my EIN, Emma Chen Consulting, specializing in financial advisory services, legitimate, clean, with meticulous records from day one. I opened a business account, got proper insurance, filed all the right paperwork, everything by the book. Second, I documented the conversation with Sarah. Not just notes, I wrote a detailed email to my lawyer, a different lawyer this time, someone Sarah had never met, explaining that I was allowing my sister temporary use of my EIN for her import-export business. I made it clear that I was not involved in her business operations, had no ownership stake, and would not be participating in any capacity beyond providing the tax identification number. Just to be safe, I told my lawyer, Marcus Chen, no relation, though we joked about it. Family business can get complicated. Marcus was sharp, cynical, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. Perfect for what I needed. "Emma, I have to advise against this," he said, looking at me over his desk. "An IN isn't something you lend out like a cup of sugar. If she does anything questionable, the IRS is going to come looking for you first." "I know, my dad. That's why I'm documenting everything. I just want to help my sister, but I want to protect myself too." He'd made me sign an acknowledgement that I was proceeding against legal advice, then helped me set up a paper trail that would make the Library of Congress jealous. Every email to Sarah went through him first, every text message was screenshotted and backed up, every interaction documented, timestamped, and filed. "You really don't trust her, do you?" Marcus asked after the 3rd day of this. "I trust her to be exactly who she is," I replied, which was true enough. Third, I kept my distance from Sarah's business. When she'd text asking for advice, I'd redirect her to professional consultants. When she'd invite me to meet with suppliers, I'd decline politely. When she'd try to put my name on any paperwork beyond the EIN, I'd refuse and document the refusal. I thought you wanted to help, she complained after I turned down signing off on her first major import contract. I gave you my EIN, I reminded her. That's the help you asked for. The rest is your business, Sarah. Your vision, your success. Wouldn't want to take that away from you. Her smile had faltered for just a moment. In my first life, she'd loved having me involved. It made it easier to blur the lines, to make me complicit. But she recovered quickly. You're right, she said. This is my baby. I should own it completely. Oh, you will, I thought. You definitely will. Sarah's business launched with the kind of flash and spectacle she'd always loved. She rented a warehouse space in the industrial district, threw a massive opening party, and started posting on social media about her entrepreneurial journey. I went to the party, watched her hold court in a designer dress I knew she couldn't afford yet, talking about her vision and her passion for bringing European elegance to American markets. Your sister's really something, one of the guests said to me, a woman I vaguely recognized from the local business association. You must be so proud. I am, I said, the lie smooth as silk. She's worked so hard for this. What I didn't say, she's going to work even harder at destroying it because I knew what was coming. I'd lived through it once already, from the other side. Sarah's business model was fundamentally flawed. She was importing luxury goods, handbags, scarves, jewelry, but she was cutting corners everywhere. Cheap shipping to save money, even though it meant damaged products. Minimal quality control because inspections cost too much. And worst of all, she was underreporting the value of imports to dodge customs duties and taxes. In my first life, she'd gotten away with it for 3 years before the hammer fell. By then, she'd built such a complicated web of shell companies and fraudulent transactions that when investigators tried to trace it, the easiest target was me, the legitimate business owner she'd been funneling everything through. This time, there was no web. There was just Sarah, operating under my EIN, but with none of my protective infrastructure. Every corner she cut, every tax she dodged, every fraudulent claim she made, it was all tied directly to her operations, not mine. And I was documenting everything. How's business? I'd ask when we met for our monthly sister dinners. Mom insisted we stay close, and I played along. Amazing, she'd gush, showing me photos of her latest inventory. I'm already profitable, Emma. Can you believe it? 3 months in and I'm in the black. She wasn't. I knew the numbers didn't work, not with her overhead and her spending. But she was good at making it look successful, at least on the surface. That's wonderful, I'd say. Are you keeping good records? For tax season? She'd wave a hand dismissively. I have an accountant. She didn't. She had QuickBooks and a prayer, the same as last time. But I'd nod and smile and make small talk about family gossip while mentally calculating how deep a hole she was digging. 6 months in, she started missing payments on her warehouse lease. I knew because the landlord called me. My EIN was on file, after all. I'm not involved in that business, I told him politely. You'll need to speak with Sarah Chen directly. She's the operator. But your tax ID is being used with my permission for her sole proprietorship. All business operations, contracts, and liabilities are hers. If you need documentation of that arrangement, I can have my lawyer send it over. He'd grumbled but backed off. I sent the documentation anyway, just to be safe. Added it to the growing file Marcus was maintaining. Your sister is sinking, Marcus observed during one of our meetings. You know that, right? I know. And you're just going to watch? I looked him in the eye. I gave her an opportunity. What she does with it is her choice. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Make sure you keep documenting everything. Always. The first year passed in a strange sort of slow-motion disaster. I watched Sarah make every mistake I knew she'd make, following the same pattern as my first life, but without the safety net of my involvement. She expanded too fast, taking on debt she couldn't service. She hired friends instead of qualified employees, leading to costly mistakes and theft. She continued underreporting her imports, building up a massive customs duty liability she didn't even realize existed. And through it all, she posted on social media about her success, the exotic trips to meet suppliers, financed with business credit she'd never repay. The designer wardrobe, marked as business expenses even though she wore them clubbing. The luxury car, leased under the business for the tax deduction. Sarah's doing so well, Mom said during a family dinner. You should see her new apartment, Emma, right in the heart of downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows. Sounds expensive, I said mildly. She can afford it, Mom said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Her business is thriving. Netta was quieter, but I caught him watching Sarah with a slight frown. He'd built his own business from nothing, the hard way. He knew what real success looked like, and this wasn't it. How's your business, Emma? He asked, changing the subject. Steady, I said, by growing slowly but sustainably. I'm being conservative with expenses, making sure I have a solid foundation before I expand. Sarah laughed, the sound just slightly too loud. That's so like you, Emma, always playing it safe. Sometimes you have to take risks to really succeed. Sometimes, I agreed, and sometimes you have to know the difference between calculated risks and reckless gambling. The table went quiet for a moment. Mom cleared her throat and started talking about a neighbor's daughter's wedding. But Sarah's eyes met mine across the table, and for just a second, I saw something flicker there. Uncertainty? Suspicion? Then it was gone, replaced by her practiced smile. 18 months in, the IRS sent the first letter. It came to my business address, a P.O. box I maintained separately from my home. Standard audit notification for businesses operating under my EIN. I called Marcus immediately. They're doing a routine examination of tax filings, he explained after reviewing the letter. Pretty standard for new businesses, especially in the import sector. High risk for customs violations. What do I need to do? Provide documentation of your business operations, which should be easy since you've been meticulous about record keeping. What about Sarah's business? They'll examine that too, since it's under the same EIN. But you have clear documentation that you're not involved in operations. As long as your records are clean, and they are, you should be fine. Should be. Those words echoed in my head as I gathered my documentation. Bank statements showing my business income and expenses, all legitimate. Client contracts for my consulting work. Tax payments, all properly filed and paid. Insurance policies, business licenses, everything clean, everything proper, everything exactly the opposite of what they'd find when they looked at Sarah's operations. I forwarded the IRS letter to Sarah with a brief note. We're being audited. You'll need to provide documentation for your business operations. Let me know if you need my lawyer's contact info. She called me within 5 minutes, her voice tight with panic. Emma, what is this? An audit? Why are they auditing us? It's routine, I said calmly. New businesses get examined sometimes, especially in high-risk sectors like import-export. Just gather your records and you'll be fine. What records? My heart rate picked up, but I kept my voice steady. Your business records, income statements, expense reports, import documentation, customs declarations, tax payments, everything related to your business operations. Silence on the other end. Then, I have most of that. Most? I mean, I have records. They might not be completely organized. They were going to be a disaster. I knew they would be. Because Sarah had never been good with organization, and she'd been too busy living the lifestyle to bother with tedious things like accurate bookkeeping. You should probably hire an accountant, I suggested. A good one. The IRS takes these audits seriously. Can't you help me? You're good with this stuff. Sarah, I'm not involved in your business, remember? You wanted to own it completely. Your vision, your success. I could almost hear her grinding her teeth. Right, okay, I'll figure it out. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a moment, phone in hand, waiting for the guilt to come. The sisterly concern. The urge to help. But all I felt was a cold satisfaction. The trap was springing. The next few months were a masterclass in watching someone self-destruct. Sarah hired an accountant, A cheap one she found online, not the professional firm she SIs needed. He quit after 2 weeks when he realized the scope of the disaster he'd walked into. She hired a tax attorney. Again, the budget option. He lasted a month before strongly advising her to seek specialized counsel and removing himself from the case. Meanwhile, the IRS investigation expanded. What started as a routine audit became a full examination when they discovered the discrepancies in her import declarations, tens of thousands of dollars in undeclared customs duties, fraudulent business expense deductions, personal expenses disguised as business costs, and it was all tied to my EIN. But here's what they also found. My business. Clean, legitimate, properly documented, Emma Chen Consulting. Every transaction traceable, every deduction justified, every tax payment made on time. 2 businesses, 1 EIN, but only one of them was operating legally. The IRS agent assigned to the case called me in for an interview. Her name was Janet Morrison, and she had the kind of tired eyes that said she'd seen every scam in the book. "Ms. Chen," she began, sitting across from me in a sterile conference room, "can you explain why there are 2 separate business entities operating under your EIN?" "There's only one business entity," I corrected gently. "My business, Emma Chen Consulting. My sister Sarah is operating a sole proprietorship using my EIN with my permission, but it's her business, not mine." Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unusual." "Family helping family," I said with a shrug. "I gave her my EIN when she was starting out to save her time on the application process. I didn't realize she'd use it for so long." "Are you involved in her business operations at all?" "No, ma'am. I have documentation confirming that." I slid a folder across the table. Email correspondence with my attorney establishing the boundaries of our arrangement. Screenshots of conversations where I declined involvement in operational decisions. Copies of contracts and agreements I refused to sign. My business operates completely independently from hers. Janet paged through the documentation, her expression unreadable. "This is very thorough." I believed in being careful. I wanted to help my sister, but I also wanted to protect my own business interests. "Smart." She made a note. "And you're aware of the discrepancies we found in the business operating as Sarah Chen Luxury Imports?" "I've become aware, yes. Sarah mentioned the audit was expanding." "It's beyond an audit at this point, Ms. Chen. We're looking at potential fraud charges. Significant customs violations. Tax evasion, the amount involved is substantial." I let my eyes widen slightly, playing the concerned sister. "I had no idea it was that serious. Given your documentation and the clear separation you maintained, I don't believe you were involved." Janet closed her folder. "But I need to be direct with you. Your sister is in serious trouble. The evidence suggests systematic fraud over an extended period. The penalties and back taxes could be in the millions." Millions. The same amount I'd been charged with in my first life. The cosmic justice of it almost made me smile, but I kept my expression appropriately somber. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked. "Cooperate fully with the investigation. Provide any additional documentation we request, and—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "You might want to encourage your sister to get proper legal representation, the kind that specializes in federal tax fraud cases." "I will, thank you." As I left the building, my phone buzzed. Sarah. "Emma, we need to talk, now." We met at the same cafe where this all started. Full circle. Sarah looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. The designer wardrobe replaced with yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. "They're saying I owe $3 million, she said before I'd even sat down. $3 million, Emma, in taxes and penalties and customs duties, and I don't have $3 million. I don't have $300,000. I'm negative. I'm drowning." I ordered a coffee and waited. "You have to help me," she continued, her voice cracking. "You're my sister. Family helps family, right? That's what you always say." "I gave you my EIN," I said quietly. "That was the help you asked for." I need more than that. I need I need you to tell them you were involved, that we were partners. That way we can split the liability and no. She blinked. What? No, Sarah. I'm not going to lie to federal investigators and claim I was involved in your fraud. It's not fraud. It's just, I made some mistakes. The accountant said, "You underreported your imports by hundreds of thousands of dollars," I interrupted. "You claimed personal expenses as business deductions. You operated at a loss for over a year while living like you were making millions. That's not mistakes, Sarah. That's fraud." Her face crumpled. "Please, Emma, please. They're talking about criminal charges. I could go to prison." And there it was. The fear I'd lived with for months in my first life. The terror of losing everything, of being caged, of dying alone in a cell while the real criminal walked free. "You should have thought about that before you decided to build your business on lies," I said. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice rose, drawing looks from other patrons. "Why are you being so cold? This is your EIN. You're involved whether you like it or not." "Actually, I'm not." I pulled out my phone and opened my documentation folder. I have emails, text messages, legal memos, and witness statements all confirming that I had no involvement in your business operations. The IRS has already cleared me of any wrongdoing. Her face went white. You documented everything?" "Everything." "Why? Why would you do that unless—" She trailed off, and I watched the realization dawn. "Unless you knew. You knew this would happen." I said nothing. "How?" she whispered. "How could you possibly know?" I could tell her the truth about the rebirth, the second chance, the memories of everything she'd done to me. But what would be the point? She wouldn't believe me. She'd think I was crazy. And more importantly, she didn't deserve the truth. I'm a financial consultant, Sarah. It's literally my job to spot bad business models and unsustainable practices. You were doomed from the start, and anyone with eyes could see it. Then why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you stop me? I tried, remember? Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll do everything by the book. Those were my words when I gave you my EIN. You promised. You lied. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're going to regret this, Emma. Family doesn't forget. Mom and Dad will never forgive you for abandoning me when I needed you most." "Probably not," I agreed. "But I'll survive their disappointment." "Will you survive federal prison?" She stood there, trembling with rage and fear, before turning and storming out. I finished my coffee slowly, watching through the window as she got into her car, the least luxury sedan she'd be losing soon, and drove away. My phone rang. Marcus. "The IRS is moving forward with prosecution," he said without preamble. "They're offering a plea deal if she cooperates fully and agrees to repayment terms." "What kind of terms?" "Aggressive. $3 million in restitution plus penalties. She'd be paying it off for the rest of her life, assuming she can even make the minimum payments." "And if she doesn't take the deal?" "Trial. If convicted, she's looking at 5 to 7 years plus the financial penalties anyway." "They have her dead to rights, Emma. The evidence is overwhelming." Just like the evidence had been overwhelming against me in my first life. The beautiful symmetry of it almost took my breath away. "Keep me informed," I said, "always." "And Emma?" He paused. "I don't know what happened between you and your sister, and I don't need to know. But I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen someone prepare this thoroughly for a betrayal they hadn't even experienced yet. Whatever your reasons, I hope it's worth it." "It is," I said softly. "Trust me. It is." The fallout was spectacular. Sarah tried to fight it at first, hired a big-name attorney with money she didn't have, probably borrowed from some predatory lender. The attorney reviewed the case, reviewed my documentation, and apparently gave her the same advice everyone else had: take the deal. She refused, insisted she was innocent, that I had set her up, that this was all a misunderstanding. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching as the prosecution methodically dismantled her. Defense, they brought in customs agents who testified about the underreported imports, IRS investigators who detailed the tax evasion, forensic accountants who showed how she'd laundered personal expenses through the business, her own employees who admitted she'd told them to lie on official documents. And through it all, my documentation served as a shield. Every time Sarah's attorney tried to implicate me, the prosecution would produce an email or text or legal memo proving I'd had no involvement. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor asked me when I took the stand, did you ever participate in your sister's business operations? No, ma'am. Did you ever advise her to underreport her imports or claim false deductions? No, ma'am. In fact, when I gave her permission to use my EIN, I specifically asked her to promise she'd do everything by the book. And did she make that promise? Yes, ma'am, she did. The prosecutor submitted the cafe recording into evidence. I'd made it on my phone that day, just audio, capturing Sarah's promise to stay legitimate. Sarah's attorney had tried to object, unlawful recording, invasion of privacy, but we were in a one-party consent state, and I was a party to the conversation. The judge allowed it. Listening to it played in open court, hearing Sarah's voice promising to be careful, to stay legal, to do everything right, and then hearing the mountain of evidence showing she'd done the opposite. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Sarah showed up looking hollow, broken. Her fancy lawyer was gone, replaced by a public defender who looked fresh out of law school. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor. Ms. Chen, she said, looking down at Sarah from the bench, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The level of fraud you committed, the systematic nature of it, the complete disregard for the law. It's frankly staggering. Sarah stood there, silent, tears streaming down her face. What's more disturbing is your complete lack of remorse. Throughout this trial, you've attempted to blame everyone but yourself. Your accountants, your employees, even your own sister, who had the good sense to document her innocence. You've shown no accountability, no recognition of the harm you've caused. Your Honor, please, the public defender started. The judge held up a hand. I'm not finished. The prosecution has recommended 5 years. Given the severity of the crimes and your lack of remorse, I'm inclined to agree. However, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to take responsibility. She looked directly at Sarah. If you allocate fully, admit to your crimes without reservation, show genuine remorse, and commit to making restitution, I'll consider a reduced sentence with the possibility of work release. If you continue to deny responsibility, you'll serve the full 5 years in federal prison. Your choice. Sarah stood there for a long moment. I watched from the gallery, barely breathing. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I did it. All of it. I thought I could get away with it. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I was wrong. It wasn't much of an allocution, but it was something. The judge sentenced her to 3 years with work release eligibility after 18 months, plus full restitution of $3.2 million with a payment plan that would take her 40 years to complete. As they led her away, Sarah's eyes met mine across the courtroom. There was no anger there anymore, no defiance, just a broken recognition of how thoroughly she'd destroyed herself. Mom stopped speaking to me after the sentencing. Dad would take my calls but kept them brief, his disappointment palpable even through the phone. She's your sister, he said during one particularly painful conversation. Family is supposed to stick together. She committed fraud, Dad, millions of dollars worth. Was I supposed to lie to federal investigators? You could have helped her before it got this far. You're good with money, with business. You could have guided her. I tried, I said, which was both true and false. She didn't want to listen. He sighed, a heavy sound that made my chest tight. I don't understand what happened to you, Emma. You used to be so kind. Kind? I'd been kind in my first life, too. Look where it got me. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly, but I'm not sorry for protecting myself. We spoke less after that. Birthday cards, obligatory holiday calls. The relationship was fractured, maybe permanently, but I was alive, free, and my business was thriving. Without Sarah's drain on my time and energy, without the constant stress of her schemes, I'd been able to focus entirely on building something real. Emma Chen. Consulting grew steadily, earning a reputation for integrity and expertise. I hired carefully, expanded thoughtfully, and within 2 years I was making more than Sarah had ever pretended to make. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to destroy me to build her empire, she'd actually been destroying herself. The effort she put into sabotaging me in my first life, the energy she spent maintaining her web of lies, if she'd put half of that into legitimate business practices, she might have actually succeeded. But that would have required being someone other than who she was. And Sarah was, fundamentally, a person who took shortcuts, who believed the rules didn't apply to her, who would step on anyone, even family, to get what she wanted. Some people don't deserve second chances. They just use them to hurt you again. 3 years passed. I was in my office, reviewing a contract for a new client, when my assistant buzzed. Emma, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is Sarah Chen. My heart rate, spiked, but my voice stayed calm. Send her in. Sarah looked different, older, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with age. She'd served her 18 months, gotten work release, and was now slowly paying off a debt she'd never escape. Emma, she said, standing awkwardly in my doorway, and Sarah, please sit. She perched on the edge of the chair across from my desk, hands clasped in her lap. I know you probably don't want to see me. What do you need? I'm not here to ask for anything, she said quickly. I wanted you to know. I figured it out. Figured what out? Why you documented everything. Why you were so prepared. She looked up at me, and her eyes were clear, sober. It's because I did it to you, isn't it? In some other version of events, some other timeline. I destroyed you, and somehow you knew. You knew what I was capable of because I'd already done it. I kept my expression neutral. That's quite a theory. I had a lot of time to think in prison, she continued, about how impossibly prepared you were, how you knew exactly what to protect yourself from before I'd even done anything wrong. The only explanation that makes sense is that I'd already done it, that you'd already lived through me betraying you. And why would you think that's even possible? She smiled, but it was sad. Because I would have done it again. In this timeline, whatever. If you'd let me get close enough, if you'd been involved in my business the way I tried to make you be, I would have done exactly what you were protecting yourself from. I know I would have. Because that's who I was. Was. Past tense. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you were right to protect yourself. You were right not to trust me. And I'm sorry. She stood up and, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What I was. What I did. And I'm trying to be better. She turned to leave. Sarah called. She stopped, looked back. Are you better? I'm trying, she said simply. Every day I'm trying. That's all I can do. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time staring at nothing. In my first life, I'd died hating her. Died with that hatred burning in my heart, a poison that consumed everything else. This time, I'd gotten my revenge. I'd watched her fall into the same trap she'd set for me, suffered the same consequences she'd forced on me. Justice, cosmic and complete. So, why did I feel hollow? Maybe because revenge, however satisfying, doesn't actually heal anything. It just balances the scales. An eye for an eye until everyone's blind. Or maybe because I'd realized something Sarah said was true. In that first life, she'd destroyed me because I let her close. because I trusted her, because I loved her despite everything. This time, I'd saved myself by becoming someone who could watch their own sister self-destruct and feel nothing but cold. Satisfaction. I'd won, I'd survived, I'd thrived, but I'd also lost something. Some essential part of myself that believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people could change. Though maybe that was the price of survival. Maybe you couldn't come back from betrayal that deep and remain the same person. Maybe the only way to protect yourself from monsters was to become a little monstrous yourself. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Meeting with the new client moved to 3 p.m. You ready? Ready, I typed back. I pulled up the contract again, pushing thoughts of Sarah and redemption and the cost of revenge aside. I had work to do, a business to run, a life to live. And if that life was colder, harder, more guarded than the one I'd lived before, well, at least it was mine. Bought and paid for with Sarah's destruction and my own carefully documented innocence. In the end, maybe that was enough. Or maybe I was just telling myself that to sleep at night. 5 more years passed. Emma Chen Consulting had grown beyond my wildest dreams from either life. 50 employees, offices in 3 cities, annual revenue in the 8 figures. I'd been featured in Forbes, invited to speak at conferences, courted by venture capitalists wanting to invest. I said no to the VCs. Built it slow and steady, the same way I'd rebuilt my life. No shortcuts, no borrowed time. Every success earned honestly. Sarah and I didn't speak much. Occasional texts on birthdays. A brief conversation at Dad's funeral 2 years ago, both of us too grief-stricken to do more than acknowledge each other's presence. Mom had softened slightly, especially after Dad died. She'd called me crying one night, admitting she'd been too hard on me, that she understood I'd been protecting myself, that she just wished things had been different. I know you think I chose Sarah over you, she said through tears. But I was just trying to hold our family together. I failed. I failed both of you. You didn't fail, Mom, I'd told her, and meant it. Some things just can't be held together. Some breaks are permanent. Sarah had finished her work release and was working 2 jobs. One as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, one as a weekend manager at a retail store. Every spare dollar went to her restitution payments. She lived in a tiny studio apartment, drove a 15-year-old Honda, wore thrift store clothes. I knew all this because Mom told me. Not because I asked, but because she seemed to need me to know, to understand that Sarah was paying her debt quite literally. She asks about you sometimes, Mom said during one of our calls, and she's proud of what you've built. She told me that. That's nice, I said, non-committal. Do you ever think about, reconciliation? Did I? Sometimes late at night, I'd wonder what it would be like to have a sister again. To have family beyond my aging mother and the employees who depended on me. But then, I'd remember dying in that cell, the cold concrete, the fluorescent lights, the absolute certainty that I'd been destroyed by someone who was supposed to love me, and I'd think, no. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. Maybe someday, I told Mom, which was kinder than the truth. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at a conference in Chicago giving a keynote speech about ethical business practices. The irony of that wasn't lost on me, the woman who'd methodically documented her sister's destruction and talking about ethics. But I'd earned the right to speak on it. I'd built my business honestly. I'd refused shortcuts even when they were offered. I'd proven that you could succeed without compromising your integrity. Even if the method I'd used to protect that integrity was morally complicated. After my speech during the networking reception, a woman approached me. Late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of presence that commanded attention. Emma Chen, she said, offering her hand. I'm Diane Morrison. That was an excellent speech. Morrison. The name tickled something in my memory. Thank you, I said, shaking her hand. Morrison, are you related to Janet Morrison, the IRS investigator? She smiled. My sister, she's the one who told me about you, actually. Said you were one of the most thoroughly prepared witnesses she'd ever encountered. That you documented a fraud scheme before it even happened. My blood ran cold. I'm not sure I'd phrase it that way. No? How would you phrase it? I studied her carefully. This felt like a test. I protected my business interests while allowing a family member to pursue their entrepreneurial goals. The fact that those goals turned out to be fraudulent wasn't something I caused or could have prevented. But you knew, Diane said softly. Didn't you? You knew exactly what would happen. I knew my sister's character, I said carefully. I knew the business model was unsustainable. I knew she had a history of taking shortcuts. Was it such a stretch to protect myself from foreseeable risks? Diane was quiet for a moment then. Janet said the documentation you provided was unlike anything she'd seen. Not reactive, but proactive. Like you were building a legal defense before a crime was committed. She found it both impressive and deeply unsettling. I'm a consultant, I said. Planning ahead is literally my job. Is that what you tell yourself? The question landed like a punch. I took a sip of my drink to buy time, then met her eyes. Why are you here, Ms. Morrison? If this is about the case, it's been closed for years. It's not about the case, it's about you. She pulled out a business card. I run an ethics advisory firm. We consult with companies on building integrity-based cultures, preventing fraud, protecting whistleblowers. I think you'd be an interesting addition to our team. I have my own company. Yes, and it's impressive, but I'm offering you the chance to do something meaningful, to help other people avoid the situation you faced. Or, she paused significantly, to help people in your sister's situation understand the consequences before they cross the line. Why would you want me? Based on what your sister told you, you must think I'm ruthlessly pragmatic, Diane suggested. Willing to let someone destroy themselves rather than intervene? Cold-blooded enough to document a disaster and watch it unfold? Yes, I said quietly. All of that. Good. Because the people who commit fraud, who cut corners, who destroy lives, they're not cold-blooded. They're self-deceptive. They believe their own lies. What we need are people who can see through the self-deception, who can spot the warning signs, who understand exactly how these situations develop because they've lived it. I'm not interested in helping people like my sister, I said flatly. I'm not asking you to, I'm asking you to help their victims, the employees who lose their jobs when fraudulent companies collapse, the investors who lose their savings, the families who get torn apart. You understand the cost of fraud better than most because you've paid it. I thought about my first life, about dying in that cell, abandoned and broken, about all the people Sarah had probably hurt before me, all the people she would have hurt after if I hadn't stopped her. I'll think about it, I said. Diane smiled. That's all I ask. Call me when you've decided. I didn't call for 3 months. I was busy with my own company, with my own life. I didn't need a new project, didn't want to dive back into the world of fraud and betrayal and complicated family dynamics. But the conversation stayed with me, nagged at me during quiet moments. Finally, I called. I have conditions, I told Diane. Name them. I won't work on cases involving family members. I can't be objective. Understood. I won't compromise my own business. This would be part-time, consulting basis. Perfectly acceptable. And I need to know, are you doing this to help people or to study me? Because if this is some kind of psychological experiment, it's not, Diane interrupted. Emma, the world is full of people who make terrible decisions, who hurt others, who destroy themselves. Some of them are malicious, but many of them are just lost, confused, following bad examples or bad advice. If we can reach them early, before they cross lines they can't uncross, we can prevent a lot of suffering. And the ones who won't listen? Then we protect their potential victims. Document the warning signs. Build cases that can't be ignored. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like what I'd done with Sarah. When do I start? I asked. The first case Diane gave me was a small manufacturing company where the CFO was showing signs of embezzlement. Nothing proven yet, just red flags. Unusual expenses, missing documentation, defensive chase. behavior when questioned. I met with the company's CEO, a man in his 60s who'd built the business from nothing and couldn't believe his trusted lieutenant might betray him. "Tom's been with me for 15 years, he said. "He's like family." Those words made something twist in my chest. "That's often when it's hardest to see," I said gently. "When you trust someone, you don't want to believe they'd hurt you." "But Tom wouldn't—" "Let me look at the records," I interrupted. "If I'm wrong, you've wasted a consulting fee. If I'm right, I can help you protect your company before it's too late." He agreed reluctantly. It took me 3 days to find the pattern. Tom was skimming, had been for years. Small amounts carefully hidden, but there. Probably close to 500,000 stolen over time. When I presented my findings to the CEO, he broke down. How could he do this, after everything I've done for him? I didn't have a good answer. How could Sarah have done it to me? How could anyone betray someone who trusted them? Some people, I said carefully, convince themselves they deserve it, that they're underpaid, underappreciated, entitled to more. They tell themselves stories until they believe them. What should I do? That depends on what you want. You could report him, prosecute, try to recover the money. Or you could fire him quietly, avoid the publicity. Or you could confront him, demand restitution, give him a chance to make it right. What would you do? I thought about Sarah, about the choice I'd made. I'd document everything, protect myself legally, and then I'd make sure he faced consequences. Not out of revenge, but because people who get away with it once will do it again, to someone else. The kindest thing you can do is stop him now. The CEO fired Tom, reported him to the authorities, and recovered most of the stolen money. Tom took a plea deal, served 18 months, and came out ruined. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just a cold recognition that this was how it worked. Actions had consequences, betrayal had costs. I was good at this job, maybe because I understood it too well. Over the next 2 years, I consulted on dozens of cases. Embezzlement, fraud, corporate espionage, internal sabotage. Every one of them a betrayal, a trusted person destroying trust. Some of the perpetrators reminded me of Sarah, arrogant, self-deceptive, convinced of their own cleverness. Those were easy. I had no sympathy for them. Others were different. Desperate people making terrible choices, single parents stealing to feed their kids, addicts embezzling to fund their habits. People who'd made one bad decision and then compounded it with more bad decisions until they couldn't see a way out. Those were harder. "You can't save everyone," Diane told me after I agonized over a case involving a young accountant who'd started stealing to cover gambling debts. "Some people won't accept help until they hit a bucket bottom. All you can do is protect the innocent." "I know," I said. It just feels incomplete, like I'm just documenting disasters, not preventing them." "You are preventing them. For the next victim, the next company. Every fraud you expose, every scheme you unravel, that's one less person who gets destroyed the way you were. The way I was." Past tense, like that Emma no longer existed. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I'd left her behind in that jail cell in another timeline, another life. Year 8 since my rebirth. I was in my office, late evening, reviewing case files when my phone rang. "Mom." "Emma, honey, I need you to come to the hospital." My heart dropped. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. It's Sarah. She collapsed at work. They're running tests, but they think it might be her heart. Can you come?" I stared at my desk at the case files spread across it. Stories of betrayal and consequences, justice served. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I heard myself say. Sarah looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, IV in her arm, face pale. She was only 46, but she looked 60. 8 years of hard living, hard work, and the weight of her debt had aged her prematurely. Mom was in the chair beside the bed, holding Sarah's hand. She looked up when I came in. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I nodded, staying near the door. What did the doctors say?" Stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Her heart it's weak from years of stress and overwork. They say she needs to slow down, reduce her workload, but she couldn't, not with the restitution payments hanging over her head. If she reduced her work hours, she'd default on her payment plan. If she defaulted, she'd violate the terms of her sentencing agreement. The trap was still springing 8 years later, still grinding her down. Emma, Sarah's voice, weak and raspy. I moved closer to the bed. I'm here. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I know I already said it, but I need you to know. I understand what I did to you now. Not just the fraud, but I destroyed our relationship. I destroyed our family for money, for status, for things that don't matter. Sarah, let me finish, she interrupted, then had to pause to catch her breath. You were right about everything. About me, about my business model, about the consequences. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen because I thought I was smarter than everyone else. Smarter than you. She laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a cough. Turns out you were the smart one. You built something real, something that lasts. And I built a house of cards that buried me when it fell. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind her that this was exactly what she deserved, but looking at her, broken and defeated, hooked up to machines, revenge was supposed to feel better than this. The doctor says you need to reduce your stress, I said instead. I can't. The payments, how much do you still owe? 2.1 million I've been paying for 8 years and I've barely made a dent. The interest, the penalties, she closed her eyes. I'll die before I pay it off. Literally, apparently. I thought about the money sitting in my business accounts, the success I'd built, the resources I had access to. I could pay off her debt. It would be a significant chunk of my savings, but I could do it. I could free her from this burden that was literally killing her. But should I? She'd tried to destroy me. In another life, she'd succeeded. This was justice. Cosmic, perfect, poetic justice. I'm not asking you to help, Sarah said, as if reading my thoughts. I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did, what I would have done if you'd let me. I'm sorry, that's all. Mom was watching me with hopeful eyes, wanting me to be the hero, to save my sister, to rebuild our family. And I was back to that fundamental question. What was I willing to sacrifice for revenge, for justice? In my first life, I'd sacrificed everything and gotten nothing. This time, I'd gotten everything and sacrificed what? My capacity for mercy, for forgiveness, for family? I need to think, I said. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. I understand. I left the hospital and drove aimlessly, thinking. I called Diane at midnight. I need advice tonight, I said. Shoot. I explained the situation. Sarah's debt, her failing health, my ability to help. Do you want to help her? Diane asked when I finished. I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me wants to watch her suffer the way I suffered. But you didn't suffer, Diane pointed out. Not this time around. You protected yourself. You won. Exactly. So why doesn't it feel like winning? Silence on the other end. Then, what would it take for it to feel like winning? What would satisfy you? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Don't know if anything can, I admitted. Because the thing she took from me in my first life, my freedom, my dignity, my life, I can't get that back. It's gone. This whole second chance is just, I'm living a different life. And in this life, she's the one who's suffering. And that should make you happy. It should, but it doesn't. Why not? Because I struggled for words. Because I've spent 8 years watching people destroy themselves, watching families torn apart, lives ruined, futures obliterated. And at first it was satisfying because I thought of Sarah. Every fraudster I helped catch, that was Sarah paying. Every embezzler who went to jail, that was justice for what she did to me. But most of them aren't Sarah. Most of them are just broken people making terrible choices. And I can help them or I can destroy them, but either way, all I'm doing is choosing who suffers. Emma, you can't save everyone. I know, but maybe I don't have to destroy everyone either. I went back to the hospital the next morning. Sarah was awake, Mom dozing in the chair. I'll pay off your debt, I said without preamble. Sarah's eyes went wide. What? No, Emma, you can't. I can and I will, but we're doing this my way. I pulled out a contract I'd drafted overnight. You're going to sign this. It says I'm paying off your IRS debt as a loan, not a gift. You'll pay me back interest-free over 30 years. Manageable payments you can actually afford while living a normal life. Emma, and you're going to work for me, part-time, as a consultant. You're going to help me prevent other people from making the mistakes you made. You're going to talk to CFOs who are tempted to embezzle, entrepreneurs who want to cut corners, people who think they're too smart to get caught. You're going to show them what the consequences actually look like. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. Why? After everything I did? Because revenge is hollow, I interrupted. Because watching you suffer doesn't actually heal anything. Because maybe the best way to honor my second chance is to give you one too. I don't deserve it. Probably not. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. So I can stop being the person who watches her sister die and feels nothing. I held out a pen. So are you going to sign this or not? She signed with shaking hands. That was 2 years ago. Sarah works for me now, 3 days a week. She's good at it, surprisingly. When she talks to people on the edge of making terrible decisions, she doesn't lecture. She just tells them the truth. What it cost her, what she lost, how it felt to destroy her own life while thinking she was building it. Some of them listen, some don't. But the ones who do, they avoid the trap. They step back from the edge. They make better choices. And slowly, piece by piece, Sarah is paying me back. Not just the money, but something more important. She's becoming someone who helps instead of hurts, someone who builds instead of destroys. She'll never be the sister I had before. That relationship is gone, burned beyond recovery. But maybe we can be something new, colleagues, allies, people who understand each other's worst selves and choose to do better anyway. Mom is happier. Dad would have been proud, I think. And me, I still have nightmares sometimes about dying in that cell. Still wake up in a cold sweat, checking my surroundings to make sure I'm really here, really alive, really free. But I also wake up to a business I built honestly, a team I respect, and work that matters. I help people. I protect people. And I do it without destroying myself in the process. Is that redemption, forgiveness, justice? Maybe it's all three. Maybe it's none of them. Maybe it's just choosing every day to be someone who can live with themselves. And in the end, maybe that's enough. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood in front of a room full of business owners giving another keynote speech. People ask me how I spot fraud so early, I said, how I see the warning signs before anyone else. The truth is, I've lived it. I've watched someone I loved destroy themselves and nearly take me down with them. I've seen how betrayal works, how trust gets weaponized, as how people convince themselves that wrong is right. I paused, making eye contact with faces in the audience. But I've also learned something more important. Catching fraud isn't enough. Punishing wrongdoers isn't enough. If we really want to stop the cycle, we have to intervene earlier. We have to create environments where people don't feel tempted to cheat, where shortcuts aren't rewarded, where integrity isn't seen as weakness. Sarah was in the audience, sitting in the back row. We'd driven here together, prepared for this presentation together. After I finished, she'd give a workshop on recognizing the warning signs of fraud from the inside, what it feels like to start making compromises, how easy it is to rationalize, how quickly it spirals. None of us are immune to temptation, I continued. None of us are incapable of making terrible choices under the right circumstances. The question isn't whether you're a good person or a bad person. The question is, what systems do you have in place to catch yourself before you fall? Who do you trust to tell you the truth? And are you willing to listen? I saw Sarah wipe her eyes in the back row. My sister used to tell me I was too careful, I said. Too conservative, too afraid to take risks. And maybe she was right. But I'm still here, still building, still growing. Because I chose sustainable growth over spectacular collapse. The audience applauded. I stepped back and let Sarah take the podium. As she spoke, honest, raw, holding nothing back about her failures, I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, not trust, but something softer than the cold rage I'd carried for so long. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, but choosing not to let the past define the future. Maybe this was what winning really meant. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, mid-20s, nervous energy, clutching a business card. Ms. Chen, I'm Jennifer Park. I just wanted to say, your speech really resonated with me. I'm starting my own business and I've been feeling pressured to cut corners, to move faster than I'm comfortable with. But hearing you and your sister talk about the consequences, it made me realize I'd rather build slowly and build right. Smart choice, I said, smiling. Can I ask you something? How did you forgive her after what she did? I glanced at Sarah, who was talking to another attendee across the room. I'm not sure I have, I admitted. Forgiveness is complicated. But I decided that destroying her wouldn't heal me. And giving her a chance to do better wasn't about excusing what she did. It was about refusing to let her worst moments define both our lives forever. That's, Jennifer paused, searching for words. That's really mature. I laughed. It took me dying once to learn it. I don't recommend that path. She looked confused, but I just smiled and handed her my card. If you need advice as you're building your business, reach out. I'm happy to help people who want to do it right. As I watched her walk away, I felt Sarah appear at my elbow. You did great, she said quietly. So did you. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the crowd mingle and network. Do you ever wonder, Sarah asked, what would have happened if you hadn't known? If you'd trusted me this time like you did? Before. I thought about it. I'd be dead or in prison, you'd be thriving for a while. And then it would all come crashing down eventually. It always does. Maybe not as spectacularly as it did this time, but the rot would spread. You can't build something permanent on a foundation of lies. She nodded slowly. I think about that a lot, about how close I came to destroying both of us. How if you hadn't stopped me. You stopped yourself, I corrected. I just accelerated the consequences. Is that what you call it? She smiled, but there was no bitterness in it. You set a trap and let me walk into it. Yes, I said simply, because there was no point in denying it. I deserved it. Yes, you did. But you helped me anyway. After. Why? It was the same question she'd asked 100 times in 100 different ways. And every time I gave her the truth. Because revenge is a meal that leaves you hungry. Justice is necessary, but it's not sufficient. If I wanted to actually heal, I had to choose something more than watching you suffer. Even though I tried to destroy you. Even though. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm glad you came back. Glad you got a second chance. So am I said. And for the first time in 10 years, in 2 lifetimes, I meant it completely. Because this wasn't the life I'd planned for. This wasn't the revenge fantasy I'd imagined. I hadn't destroyed Sarah completely, hadn't ground her into dust, hadn't taken everything from her the way she'd taken everything from me. Instead, I'd built something better, something sustainable, a business that mattered, work that helped people, and yes, Even a relationship with my sister that, while broken in places, was slowly healing. Was it perfect? No. Did I fully trust her? Also, no. Would I ever forget what she'd done, what she'd been capable of? Never. But I'd learned that you don't have to forgive someone completely to move forward. You don't have to forget the past to build a future. You just have to decide every day whether you want to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you or by how you chose to respond to it. I chose response. I chose building. I chose life. And somewhere in that choice, I'd found something better than revenge could ever give me: peace. Not the peace of justice served or scores settled, the peace of knowing that I'd broken the cycle. That Sarah's children, if she ever had them, would grow up with a mother who understood consequences, who valued integrity, who knew the cost of betrayal. That the people I consulted with would avoid the mistakes that destroyed her. That the business I'd built would outlast both of us, helping people long after we were gone. That was worth more than watching her suffer, worth more than the cold satisfaction of perfect revenge. That was worth the second chance I'd been given. On the drive home, Sarah asked me one more question. Do you ever regret it? Giving me your EIN? Starting all of this? I thought about my first life, the cell, the hopelessness, the death. Then I thought about this life, the success, the purpose, the complicated, messy, imperfect healing. No, I said. I don't regret it because if I hadn't done it, I'd still be that person. The one who trusts blindly, who gets destroyed, who dies bitter and alone. Instead, I'm someone who protects herself, who helps others, who turned tragedy into something meaningful. Even though it meant... She gestured vaguely, encompassing her prison time, her debt, her years of suffering. Even though, I confirmed. You made your choices, Sarah. I just made sure you faced the consequences instead of making me face them. That's not cruelty, that's justice. And the helping me after, the job, the loan, the second chance? That's mercy. You can have justice and mercy. They're not mutually exclusive. She nodded, watching the city lights pass by the window. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. The mercy, I mean. The justice that I definitely earned. I smiled despite myself. Good, because the minute you stop trying, the minute you start making excuses or cutting corners or reverting to who you were, you'll bury me so deep I'll never see daylight again, she finished. I know, I've seen you work, Emma. I know how thorough you are. It terrifies me, honestly. Good, I said again. Fear keeps us honest. We drove the rest of the way in silence. But it was a comfortable silence. The kind that comes from mutual understanding. She knew what she'd done. I knew what I was capable of, and we'd both chosen, deliberately, to be better than our worst selves. That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. 2 lives, countless decisions, innumerable consequences. If I had to do it all again, would I make the same choices? Yes, without hesitation, because this life, complicated and imperfect as it was mine, earned honestly, built carefully, protected fiercely, and no one, not even my sister, could ever take that away from me again. I closed my eyes and slept peacefully with no nightmares, just dreams of the future I was still building, one honest day at a time.
Hi, cutie booty butt brains. Hi, cutie booty butt brains. We got some cutie booty butt brains up here in the chat, literally. Dolly! Hello! Thank you, my precious. Butt brain reporting for duty. Wait, reporting for duty. I'm so upset with myself. Everybody lean in for forehead kisses. Get on it. Get on in here. All right, come on. Get on closer. Don't make me reach all the way. Come on. Special. Reporting for Dookie. Look at this pimple on my cheek. Can you believe the fucking nerve of some people? Hi, friends. Hi, McButt. Grim Gigi on first. Hi, Red Hood. Hi, Blanket. Hi, Rat B. Hi, Dudley. Hi, Twipple. Hey, Camille. Hi, Skunk. Welcome back. Just ended my stream. No! But good timing. Hey, welcome. Hi, Mayhem. Hi, Matu. How are we so? Vinny Vici! Welcome back. Can't connect to chat on PC. How rude. Welcome back, Vinny. Nice to see you. Hi, Merle. Yes, how are Gwim? How are Murta? Is that your stream title in reference to the grape squishing reporter? Yes, it is, Transit. I'm so glad you recognized. Yes, it